What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm sitting here. It's about 11 o'clock at night, my time here on the West Coast, and it's obviously after the game, the loss to the Jags. This is not my post-game analysis video. I'm gonna be doing that tomorrow on Monday, as I usually do. Um, but and then I got some of my scouting report videos and stuff I'll do throughout the week and whatever. This is actually going to be more of a state of the Dolphins and catching up with where my record prediction was to this point to the season and how we've done in regard to that and so on and so forth, and a little bit of what's to come for the Dolphins, some things to expect in the future. So getting into this conversation, the first thing I want to do is I want to take a step back to 2019 because there are some things that are important to discuss regarding that, both in the things that happened and then also my evaluation of all of the things that happened. So as you guys know, just real quick, I didn't think that we should have fired Adam Gase, not because he was a perfect coach, not because he didn't have deficiencies. Of course he does and did, but primarily because comparative to Brian Flores, he's got a better record. He took us to the playoffs in the first season as a rookie head coach. He got blamed for a lot of things that were not his fault. He was great at drafting, and he actually was trying to build the team through the draft. His staff was actually a lot better at developing players. They were phenomenal at player evaluation and picking players. And I just thought it was building in the right direction. But Stephen Ross, because who he is, he gives his coaches he primarily his coaches, because he is a little bit back and forth with who he hires and who he fires, right? So but with his coaches, he's fired every single one of his coaches at approximately 3 to 3.5 years, every single one of them. What he'll do though is the in between, so like a year and a half, into that, he'll fire the GM. So he'll hire a coach, and then a year and a half later, he'll fire the GM. Then a year and a half later, he'll fire the coach, blah, 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 and goes back and forth like that, as we know. But so, 3 years had passed. There was regression from the team from their 10-6, playoff berth season in 2016, right? Ryan Tannehill, obviously, even though I never thought he was the problem, Dolphins fans were done with him. Stephen Ross wasn't, in that boat anymore or on that train. And so Stephen Ross, being, the old man that he is, getting desperate to have a winner, primarily searching for his version of Dan Marino and his version of Don Shula, with that blueprint in mind, he decided, and that's been his blueprint the entire time. I actually think that he cares more about that than actually, putting together the right staffs, whether it be coaching or front office, and, building a full, well-rounded and proper team, as opposed to just trying to chase that one quarterback that is almost near impossible to find, and then, the one head coach. There's a lot more to a football team than just that. But anyway, so 3 years had ended, or 3 years had gone by, and, Gase didn't want to tank the 2019 season, but Stephen Ross was ready to make a change because he only gives his coaches 3 years. And that's, from my evaluation of how Stephen Ross does business, that's how he goes about it when it comes to the personnel that he hires for to run the team, primarily being the head coach and then also the GM, right? So he fires Adam Gase because he doesn't want to, tank the 2019 season to chase after that quarterback, and they bring in Brian Flores. Now, I have said for, basically ever since he got here, I do not like Brian Flores. I do not, I didn't want him to become our coach. I'm not fond of his philosophies and so on and so forth. I didn't like that he agreed to tank the 2019 season. It's not a philosophy that I've ever backed, but he was brought in. It's not my choice. I'm obviously not the owner. And part of the reason why he was brought in is because he did acquiesce to Stephen Ross's demand to tank the 2019 season. Now, also consistently since 2019, I've been telling people that Flores and Greer, this combination, these guys that are in charge, are not good at drafting or development. And I've been pretty accurate to that point on those points. And so, look, let's take a look real quick at the 2019 season. Now, most Dolphins fans were okay with it. I'll never be okay with, my team losing, even if it is to go get the quarterback, right? Your franchise quarterback. Obviously, you guys know that I have a very different drafting philosophy. I do believe you build through the draft and only supplement in free agency here and there where you need it, and maybe to get some veteran guys in there, right? But my philosophy is you never take a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2, but you take one every single year and 3 or later, just depending on how badly you need one. And then what happens there is you always have an active competition. The cream of the crop will rise. You can find really good to great players in later rounds, like, as I've mentioned, Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, the GOAT, right? Russell Wilson, etc., etc. You can find really good to great guys in the later rounds. The cream rises to the top once you have an established starter and backup. Then you still always have competition, and if a guy rises up the depth chart to overtake one of those spots, good. Or you then have a lot of young developmental quarterbacks that you could then possibly use as trade chips with other teams that need quarterbacks, and you can accrue more draft capital. But then what would I do in rounds 1 or 2? Well, I would spend those draft picks primarily in the trenches, offensive and defensive line, and then sometimes sometimes in there, and obviously through the rest of the draft, then you start at, throwing in the rest of the positions. But in the first couple rounds, I would start to throw in an occasional wide receiver maybe, or a cornerback or running back, or whatever, safety or something like that. Once I've actually felt more comfortable that my trenches, my offensive and defensive lines, are built properly, and the players that I picked were good and developed, etc. Anyway, so back to 2019 season. Most people were okay with that. I was never okay with that. I didn't like that philosophy. But then you look at the moves that were made. So let's look at the draft. And I have it listed next to me, the 2019 draft, Christian Wilkins in round 1. We didn't have a second round pick because they made the trade for Josh Rosen, which I never liked. To real quick, I personally, part of the reason why I didn't like the tank is because we shipped out all of this talent and all of these players like Tunsil and Minka Fitzpatrick. I didn't want to get rid of Tannehill personally, but now look at what he's doing once he's in a place where they actually have a team built around him, right, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would have actually liked to have had Ryan Tannehill in-house to be the veteran quarterback that you could groom a young guy up behind. But having said that, I still, I get that most Dolphins fans were just done with him. The organization was done with him. And certainly on some level, it was time for him to go. And certainly I think that it was better for his career, because now look at what he's doing, right? And how well he's doing with the Titans. But having said that, I actually did, Ryan Fitzpatrick did grow on me because of his leadership ability, and then his gunslinger mentality to take some risks. And yeah, you get some bad with him, of course, but you actually get some really exciting stuff too. And he's a great leader with a lot of energy. And that's wonderful, especially for young team and young developmental players. So they bring him in. 2019. So Christian Wilkins, Michael Dieter, because we don't have a second round pick, we have a third. Then Andrew Van Ginkel, Isaiah Prince, and Van Ginkel was 5, Isaiah Prince in round 6, and then Chandler Cox and Myles Gaskin in round 7. Okay, now look at this. Now, I actually agree that Christian Wilkins is having an all right season so far, pretty solid, and maybe even to this point, you know, through 5 games, maybe, 6 games, maybe even better than his previous 2 seasons. But to me, he's still just all right. He's just a solid player, and he certainly needs a lot more consistency, needs to get better pass rush, and to me, he doesn't live up to his first round status. To me, he's more of a second or maybe even a third round player as far as I'm concerned. And I never really liked it because there was a run on defensive linemen in that draft, and instead of taking, you know, the 15th defensive lineman off the board, they could have gotten one of the top offensive linemen. Especially because if you know that you're going to tank that season to go get a quarterback who has a significant injury history and is a little bit smaller than the prototypical, right? And then also doesn't have, you know, the elite arm and the elite athleticism, you need to make sure that you protect the dude. If you want him to be Drew Brees, you got to fucking protect the dude. Okay? So they could have gotten one of the top offensive linemen. If I remember correctly, it was Garrett Bradbury who I was going after. That was my guy, who I wanted. But there were other good options there. Instead of trading for Josh Rosen, and if you still had that second round pick, then what I would have done, so I would have taken offensive lineman in round 1, then I would have gone back to the defensive line in round 2, because then you could have gotten, maybe even Christian Wilkins would have been there. Maybe he would have even been there. Maybe you could have got him in round 2. But you could have gotten a player with a that was more worth it in round 2, right? A better value. You could have gotten a better value player in round 2. Again, possibly, maybe even Christian Wilkins. Anyway, so I would have done that, and then I would have taken quarterback Will Grier in round 3 to groom up behind Ryan Fitzpatrick. Obviously, they didn't do that. They took Michael Dieter, who, you know, to me was complete trash in his first season. He hasn't actually been very good the entire time. It looks like he may have finally found a home at center, but it took them fucking 3 years to figure that out. And he's still just all right. And of course now he's hurt and he's currently on the injured reserve. So, you know, that third round pick is looking kind of, you know, maybe just okay at best. Andrew Van Ginkel, I've always personally said that he's just kind of, you know, middle of the pack. He's just kind of all right. Last year he had a solid year. Okay. But, you know, we'll get to 2020 in a minute in my overview of that. But he's just all right. So that's not looking all that great. Isaiah Prince, Chandler Cox, those guys ain't even here no more. Myles Gaskin, great value for the 7th round, but, you know, they're stunting his development. They're not using him properly, etc., etc., right? But look at the context of the season. So most Dolphins fans knew we were going to suck. I never fucking supported it. But when it comes to that season, responsible, Chris Grier and Brian Flores are responsible for that season because they constructed a roster that was not capable of putting a competitive unit out on the field. So what I'm actually ultimately getting to is because part of this conversation is I've been telling people since Jump Street that Brian Flores is a fraud, okay, and that he's not all that great, you know, blah blah blah, whatever. As you guys know, I've been called a hater for it. And it's his drafting, it's his lack of development. He didn't have any bit in the 5 wins that we got that season. Not only did he, and he even told us back then, he has a hand in every single transaction. And that's partly because he's an egotistical asshole and he has to have control over absolutely everything. That's part of the reason why he has a super young team and nothing but inexperienced coaches, because he can't deal with alphas. That's why he got rid of all the leaders last year from last year's team, because he can't deal with alphas. He likes yes men. Okay, that's part of what I have an issue with, right? There was even early stuff where the way he handled Kenny Stills and in that situation, right? The way he treated Laramie Tunsil, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Kyle Van Noy, Minka Fitzpatrick, all these guys, right? And he's a douchebag. And I've been telling people this from Jump Street. But anyway, so not only, though, did he help to create a product that is lacking in competitive nature and thereby facilitated the tank of the 2019 season, but and you can go back to my videos from each one of the games in 2019. I can't remember it all off the top of my head, and that's why I just generalize now. But I can remember some examples, but like there are many examples throughout that season where even on game day he was actively trying to tank, whether it be bad play calling, bad personnel usage, bad use of timeouts and challenges, the way he fired his first offensive line coach 4 days into training camp because he didn't want to play Michael Dieter and Shaq Calhoun because they were rookies and he didn't think they were ready. Ironically enough, though, Shaq Calhoun turned out to be one of the better offensive linemen that year, and they made sure that he kept ending up on the bench as an inactive, even though he wasn't hurt or anything like that. But he refused to take Michael Dieter out of the lineup, even though he was complete trash. So he 100% was facilitating the tank every single day of the week, even on game day for those few hours. 100%. Okay, so but you don't get a pass on that either, though. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just a throwaway. We expected that, so it doesn't count. So the rebuild officially starts in 2020. No, it started then, but that's part of the reason why the tanking strategy is so stupid, foolish, and it's a desperation move by the owner Stephen Ross to begin with, because what the tanking philosophy entails is you completely destroy your team and your roster in order to accumulate draft capital and cap space and to chase the quarterback, etc., and then it demands that you rebuild in 2 years, especially when you add in the MO of Stephen Ross and how he does business. He was only giving them 3 years, and Stephen Ross doesn't say, oh no, 2019's a throwaway. He's like, no, that's part of the process, and yeah, we did intentionally lose, but it's still fucking year one. It's still year motherfucking one. It's year one of your contract, and it's year one of this whole process. Okay? So, anyway, but at the time, I was telling people, look, man, this Dolphins team is only going to probably win a couple games, maybe at best. And it looked like, especially at the beginning of the season, that was going to be the case. They were historically bad. But the reason why they ended up getting 5 wins on the season has absolutely nothing to do with Brian Flores or his coaching ability. I thought it was absurd that people wanted to make him coach of the year because they won 5 games towards the end of the season. The reason why they won 5 games toward the end of the season was because of Ryan Fitzpatrick and his gunslinger mentality and his leadership and his ability to energize the players. The players were playing more for fucking Ryan Fitzpatrick than they were Brian Flores, unquestionably, because they were intentionally trying to lose. The players knew that they were intentionally trying to lose. But furthermore, and I've said this a bunch of times, it was also because that entire roster was essentially nothing but practice squad players, perennial backups, guys who were washed out of the league or washed out of other leagues, right? Like, nobody's. They were playing for their careers, for their NFL dreams, for their paychecks, and for their families, bro. They weren't playing for Brian Flores, and that's what got them 5 wins. Okay, and Stephen Ross actually kind of got to save face a little bit because he still got his, top 5 pick in the quarterback that he wanted, which was Tua, but he didn't have to, he was able to escape the I'm tanking and intentionally trying to lose narrative because they won 5 games. Anyway, but that's absurd. So now let's move to 2020. I said I was wrong. To be fair, they did end up winning 5 games, but that was a surprise and it was overachieving, and it wasn't because of Brian Flores and this coaching staff or because they put together a surprisingly good team. It was for those reasons that I just mentioned. Now, let's go to 2020. So 2020, we're going into it. I originally thought the team was going to be, a 6, maybe 7 win team with everything they did. So what did they do? They went out in 2020. They got Tua Tagovailoa, which I've said a million times. I love the kid. I love the person. I love the player. But I don't like the potion. And my biggest concern with him was that he was he has a significant injury history, and I knew that the Dolphins at the time, I could tell, I could see it, they weren't, in part because of how they already misstepped in the 2019 draft and so on and so forth, that they weren't going to properly build around the kid. And in particular with the offensive line. Not I'd rather have the wall of China in front of this dude, and then, average or slightly above average wide receiver core and running backs. That's a way better recipe for success, because everything flows through the trenches. And if you have amazing offensive line play, then you're going to have running backs and wide receivers that can flirt with 1,000 yards in a season. That's going to happen. Okay? So I knew they weren't going to build around him. Now, obviously, I mentioned my drafting philosophy of never taking a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2. But you can go back to my videos back then, to the 2020 draft videos. I said that if I was going to take a quarterback, it would be Justin Herbert. For a couple reasons. One, because, I knew like Joe Burrow was going to go number 1. We weren't even going to be able to get, Joe Burrow, even though I still probably would have took Herbert over Burrow. But the primary reason was because of Tua's injury history, that he's a little bit smaller, and because I knew the context with which he was going to go into, and they weren't going to set him up for success by building him a proper offensive line. So if I was going to take a quarterback in round 1, it's not my philosophy, but I would have took Herbert over him. Having said that, though, what I actually wanted to do with that pick, again, because of my base drafting philosophies, I wanted to take an offensive lineman with that first pick. But instead, of course, that, and then with and if I remember correctly, I even said back then, I still probably actually would have taken an offensive lineman with the second first round pick that we had. And then the Noah Igbenogany pick, I either would have, or if not a second offensive lineman, maybe you could have gone like, pass rusher or something like that, or maybe defensive line, right? Because I focus on the trenches. Now with the Noah Igbenogany pick, I would have taken, a running back or something like that. Antoine Winfield Jr., that would have been a really good pick. I definitely would have supported that. But the pick that I wanted at the time was Xavier McKinney, one of the top safeties in the draft. Okay, but instead, obviously, in that first round, they take Tua, the injury-prone, undersized quarterback that's got a ton of potential, but you have to build around him properly. Then they reach on Austin Jackson, which has been a complete fucking shit show. Yes, he's played a little bit better now that he's been a left guard, but not really. Not really, if we're keeping it honest. And I still think that's a failed pick. Noah, I mean, that's, at this point, even though he's only a couple years in, that's looking like an absolute trash pick. Then you get Robert Hunt in the second round. I do like that one, actually. That one turned out to be solid. And you can go back and look at my videos to see, who I would have taken in all these different spots. Because if I'm keeping it honest, once we start getting to second, third round and whatever, I don't even remember who I said. So you'd have to go back and look at the videos if you're curious. But Robert Hunt turned out to be a good pick. Raekwon Davis turned out to be a good pick. He does have to stay healthy, and he does need to be, more consistent and so on and so forth. But, he is still only in his second year, and I think that he actually has the potential to do that. I think Robert Hunt actually has the potential to be, a Pro Bowl right guard. But, he's not all 5 offensive linemen, and the rest of the offensive linemen that are around him aren't particularly great. But anyway, so those are 2 solid picks. Brandon Jones, that's just meh to me. So the first round, real quick, the first round so far is looking like two busts in Austin Jackson and Noah Igbenogany, or damn near busts. Let's not quite say that, at this point with 2 years in. Tua, you guys know, I've said I think Tua's going to be great in this league. I just don't think it's going to be for the Dolphins. And I still believe that. I think that he's not going to be a Miami Dolphin for too much longer. I actually do think that the desperation move of trading for Deshaun Watson is likely to be around the corner, but we'll get to that in a minute. But if that's the case, if he ends up going somewhere else, well, then that means the entire first round of the 2020 draft is basically a fucking bust. 3 picks, basically all fucking busts. Second round, they actually did good with Robert Hunt and Raekwon Davis. Third round, Brandon Jones, he's just meh, in my opinion. He's okay. I think he's a serviceable safety to be on a roster. But as a third round pick, Solomon Kinley for the fourth round, that's pretty solid for value-wise. But he's not consistent enough. He probably needs to be in better shape. He's obviously not even playing right now. He's benched. So, that's just kind of looking meh at best as well. Then you have fifth round picks, Jason Strowbridge and Curtis Weaver, pass rushers. They're not on the team anymore. They're gone. They've been cut. Blake Ferguson in round 6. Yeah, he's here, but he's also, they keep bringing in other long snappers to bring in competition for the dude for whatever reason. Maybe they don't actually believe in him. But, there were other players at other positions they could have took instead of a fucking long snapper with 6, especially because they had John Denny here. You didn't need to get rid of John Denny. They just didn't. And besides that, you probably could have even got Blake Ferguson or a long snapper as an undrafted free agent. You don't need to take one. So I wasn't really a big fan of that pick, but he is still here and he is still our long snapper. So it is what it is. And then Malcolm Perry, round 7, gone. Obviously not here anymore. Right? So when it comes to the 2020 season, I thought, so that's part of what they did, right? That was half of what they did in the draft, which that draft class is not looking particularly great at this point. It's just looking, it's actually not looking very good at all with 3 players that you already have cut in Strourbridge, Weaver, and Perry. Your entire first round of that class is on very thin ice. Round 2 is good. 3 and 4 have just been kind of meh. So that draft class is not looking good. 2019's it wasn't looking very good, right? Obviously cut 2 players from that class. But then they were giant spenders in free agency in 2020. I did not support any of those moves because I don't like being big spenders in free agency. It's another one of those ways in which I think that Ross has failed as an owner when it comes to football moves. Now, what I mean by that is because at the very least, he has to sign off on all of that money that goes out. He has to write those checks. So I get it. It is up to the, front office and Chris Greer and Brian Flores, who has a lot of say in personnel decisions, to properly evaluate and then, structure contracts well and so on and so forth. All of that does go on to those guys. But again, it ultimately goes back to Ross because he chose those guys to make those decisions, right? But again, though, he still has to sign off on it. I didn't fucking agree with it. I thought that it was stupid. They just completely fucking ran through all of that cap space that they fucking had. I didn't support. I thought they overpaid Eric Flowers, Van Noy, Byron Jones, all of these guys. I didn't like Jordan Howard. Ted Karras was okay. By the time they got around to giving him a contract, he ended up being relatively cheap because, he wasn't super good to begin with, but then they didn't really have much money anyway. But I told you guys, man, all that money they spent was basically fucking going to be wasted. And it was. Because especially with the kinds of contracts that they gave those guys, 3, 4, and in Byron's case, 5 years, what long-term fucking rewards are you getting from that? You're not from almost any of those guys. Not to mention the roster turnover on this team for the past 3 years has been absolutely outrageous and hasn't helped in the continuity or chemistry with this team. Okay, but anyway, so, so that's what they did. Those were the moves they made. I wasn't a fan of it. I disagreed with a lot of that stuff. I don't like how they prioritize in the draft. I don't like reaching on players like Noah and Austin Jackson. I don't like taking, players with significant injury histories, whether it be, Will Fuller or, this past season, which we'll still get to, or, even Tua. Again, it's not the player or the person, but it was just because I knew they were not going to protect him. And I don't want an smaller injury-prone quarterback behind a porous offensive line. That's a recipe for disaster that I saw coming. But so, my expectation for the Dolphins in 2020 was that they would go maybe, 6 or 7 wins, because I saw that as where the caliber of team that they were going to be putting on the field, especially because Tua obviously wasn't healthy. I thought that they absolutely 100% should have redshirted him that year. Just let him sit, learn behind Ryan Fitzpatrick, because he's a great mentor and a great guy to learn behind. And then that way he can get fully healthy. You don't have to worry about him not knowing the playbook in full, right? You don't have to worry about the mistakes and the bad decisions and the near interceptions that he's throwing because his, throwing motion is off because of the hip, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, you don't have to worry about the bad taste in people's mouths after seeing his performance, whether you think it's good or bad or whatever, right? Like, none of that needed to fucking happen. And it didn't make any fucking sense. And of course, he also did sustain 2 injuries in that season. One to, I think, one of his ankles, if I'm not mistaken. It was a lower leg injury. I think it was an ankle. And then to hit the thumb on his throwing hand. So he even did get injured in that season. So none of that was necessary. I thought it was stupid. And it definitely, 100%, in my head, came down to Stephen Ross's decision. And it exposed Brian Flores a bit more for being a liar and a hypocrite. Because in the 49ers game, when we destroyed them, after the game, he was asked, why didn't Tua go in? And his response, there was a couple things that he actually said in that interview. One is that, why would I put him in for garbage time when all he's going to do is hand the ball off? Which obviously proved to be a lie, and he was a hypocrite because the very next week against the Jets, he put him in garbage time. Again, though, I guarantee you that was Stephen Ross calling down and being like, I want to see my quarterback. I want to see him. I don't like that you said the previous week, why would I put him in for garbage time when all he's going to do is hand the ball off? I don't like that you said that. I want you to put him in. It's garbage time. We're blowing out the Jets. Put him in. The other thing that he said in that press conference was, he's like a kid to me, or he's like my kid. And if he was my kid, I wouldn't want to rush him along, et cetera, just to put him in the very next week and then make him the starter the week after that. Again, though, I guarantee that was a Ross decision where he said, especially too with the way that the fan base reacted to Tua going into the Jets game. They were Stephen Ross was like, all right, that's it. I want to see him on the fucking field. And that's why they made the stupid and also fucked up decision to bench Ryan Fitzpatrick when it didn't make any sense whatsoever. He just won 2 games, was looking a lot better. You were 3-3. It wasn't because of performance or injury. It was because they wanted to see the shiny new toy on the field, even though he wasn't even close to ready. Okay, so again, Brian Flores gets exposed in there for being a liar and a hypocrite, among some of the other things that are problems and issues for him. Part of which, by the way, and part of the reason why I've never agreed with his hiring is a couple other important factors. One, no Belichick disciple ever works because they always just try and replicate what the Patriots do, and that doesn't work because the Patriots, what made them so successful was a very unique combination of things. Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, et cetera, right? So, not to mention really good coaches in the building, at good positions, right? With Matt Patricia for a while there as defensive coordinator, Josh McDaniels as offensive coordinator. They had a great offensive line coach for such a long time, et cetera, right? So it was a very unique situation that you are not able to replicate anywhere else. And the only Belichick disciple that has is Mike Vrabel with the Titans, who does things very differently. Okay, so that was part of it, but and then you know, the other context is because he clearly has shown in a number of different ways, partly because of his lack of concern for the offensive line, for the running back position, among other things. He showed that a lot of his core philosophies were, I'm just going to basically try and replicate what the Patriots do. That's why he brought over tons of Patriots players and coaches. That's why he adopted the fucking Bill Belichick defense. People call Brian Flores a defensive genius. No, he's just replicating what Bill Belichick was doing. Okay, so anyway, he gets exposed. To me, I thought they were maybe a 6 or 7 win team. I thought that's about where their ceiling was based off of the roster that they had constructed and the coaching staff, etc., which obviously, of course, has changed each and every season as well. So there's almost no continuity on the coaching staff, particularly on the offense. New playbooks, new philosophies, new techniques that are taught, which causes a lot of different issues. No chemistry or consistency, continuity, like I said, right? But so I thought they were maybe a 6 or 7 win team. Now I ended up being wrong about that because they overachieved yet again and got to 10 wins, which, you know, ironically enough, wasn't enough to get them to the playoffs, even though that was the first year of the expanded playoff field with 7 teams in each conference, even though Adam Gase was able to do it in his first year with a mediocre team and, you know, a smaller playoff pool. Right? But so why did they overachieve though? Because the Dolphins, and people they never liked when I said this, but they got lucky in a lot of ways. What I mean by that is because when you look at the back 2/3 of the season in particular, they played almost nothing but either bad and or decimated by injuries and COVID teams. So the vast majority of the teams that they played, and the strength of schedule is part of the proof in that. I mean, you can go back and look at all those individual teams and there's plenty of proof there, but the strength of schedule is part of the proof. We started off with a top 5 hardest strength of schedule and ended up as one of the bottom 5 strongest schedules, or, you know, one of the top 5 weakest schedules by the end of the season, because a bunch of those teams just ended up not being good. But it also helped the Dolphins out that earlier on in the season, in the first 1/3 of the season, the first third of the season, they got to beat up on a decimated team like the 49ers. Okay, that game would have never have been like that if they were at full strength. Not even fucking close. We probably would have fucking lost that game. Okay, so they did get lucky in that regard, that they ended up being one of the healthier teams throughout the entire season, particularly in the first half of the season. They did start losing their wide receivers and running backs and stuff, and a couple other players towards the back end of the season. They did lose Byron Jones for a couple games in there in the middle of the season. Right? But they remained basically one of the healthier teams in an injury-riddled and COVID-decimated fucking season. Okay, so yes, they got lucky because that's not something anybody can control. So you just have to, you know, the ball has to bounce in your way. And it did. They got super lucky because of that. Also, in particular to Tua, and again, it's not because of him. A lot of it was because they put him in when he wasn't ready, particularly health-wise. That had a lot to do with it, right? I'm sure he didn't trust the offensive line up there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The play calling was bad. Obviously, Chan Gailey was not really his, you know, guy. He was more for Fitzpatrick. All of those factors played into it. But it's also a fact that there were a number of times where he made bad decisions and threw near interceptions. I made a video about all of the interceptions he did throw and then would-be interceptions, right? So, even he got lucky a ton. Now, that again, that's not shitting on Tua. and saying that he's bad or he's a bust. It's just the reality in the context of the situation. But to give the full context, a lot of that is because of all of those other issues that are out of his control, right? He didn't choose to fucking, I mean, I'm sure, if he was asked, he would say, yeah, I wanted to be in there and play. But it wasn't his choice to insert him in the game when he was at 60%, et cetera, as a rookie, whatever. But even, when it comes to their winning, his winning record, but even just the team overall, because we had the chance to play a bunch of, busted and weak teams, it made our team look better than it was, especially on the defense. Now, the fact of the matter is that the context of most of those games, there were a couple games where Tua definitely played better. Obviously, the Cardinals and the Kansas City Chiefs game are the two primary games that people like to highlight, and it's true, he did perform better in those games, although he still had two would-be interceptions in nearly every one of the games. Again, not completely his fault. It's almost not his fault at all because of the surrounding circumstance. But anyway, point is though, is that a lot of the reason why we ended up getting to 10 wins and overachieving is not just because of the strength of schedule, but because then our individual units, the defensive and offensive units, were able to overachieve against those lesser quality opponents and make themselves look better. Now, the defense, I've been telling everybody, was not going to be fucking elite this year, and it really wasn't last year. They had a couple categories, important categories like turnovers, third down defense, scoring defense, red zone defense. They were really good at those. Again, a lot of that has to do with the quality of opponent that they played against, and that's part of the reason why I didn't even think that they were actually that good. But they did dominate those categories. The other problem with that, though, is that that's not something that is logically and consistently going to carry over year in and year out. It's super hard to do that. That's part of the reason why I said there was going to be regression this year. I didn't quite think it was going to be this bad, but when you take into the full context of bad coaching, et cetera, it's not completely surprising. Anyway, so all of that, has to do with why they actually ended up overachieving. But with the defense, the rest of that defense wasn't particularly good. They weren't, very good. They weren't very good with the run or pass rush, and they still did give up, significant yardage. They just didn't break. They were very, very bendy. They just didn't break. So a lot of the categories they still weren't good in. So logically, when you're, either in the middle of the pack or in the back end of the pack with most of your statistical categories, but then like the 3 or 4 or 5 categories where you're at the top of the league, if those categories are categories that are super difficult to translate year in and year out, then logically you would say that they're going to have to take a step back. You throw in the bad coaching, the all of that stuff, and then you get what we have now, and the fact also you add in that they've had to be on the field so much. But last year, even the offense overachieved and looked better than what they did at times because the defense and the special teams was constantly setting them up with short fields, et cetera. Okay, so yes, there was a lot of luck. The turnover rate that we got last year, Xavier Howard at full health is fucking amazing. He had 10 interceptions and the 1 fumble last year. He was a third of their overall turnovers. Actually, a little bit over a third. Okay? But some of it has to do with luck too, right? Like, it's not all just fucking... So they got super... Now, again, they did take advantage of those weaker teams, and that is something that you want to see, but it's not as indicative of the product on the field. In other words, it's not necessarily that they're really great. You have to look at the full context. Anyway, so I thought they were going to be maybe 6 or 7. I was wrong. They overachieved. But the quality of product that they actually put on the field, when you take into account all of the data, the ways in which the ball bounced in their favor, the way they got to stay healthy, etc., play lesser competition, whatever, that helped them to overachieve and get to the 10 wins. And, you know, it made them look like they were a better team than what they actually were. Now, that ended up being, you know, a huge detriment, because not only does the tanking philosophy make sure, you know, demand that you know, shit away your first season and then in the next 2 years rebuild that shit and turn it around super fast, especially with the you know, Stephen Ross MO context added in. But then it added even extra pressure and extra expectations, because then you won 10 games and just barely missed the postseason. Okay, so I know this is kind of a long video, but this has all been kind of stewing up in me, and I just wanted to get this all out. So then, you know, after that, then we go to the 2021 season. They jettison all those big contracts. They get rid of all the veteran leadership because Flo is a giant man-child and he can't handle other alphas. More, you know, churn on the roster, more churn on the coaching staff. He's got nothing but yes men in there, etc., etc. Yes, it's true that this offseason they weren't giant spenders in free agency, but that had a lot to do with the fact that they actually were the number one contender for Deshaun Watson, and Stephen Ross had signed off on the deal. They were literally just waiting for the new league year to open, and then the allegations hit and they pulled it back. Okay, otherwise he would have been a Miami Dolphin from fucking Jump Street this year. That's why they weren't big spenders in free agency, really, outside of Will Fuller, which obviously turned out to be, or is turning out to be, a, you know, pretty big mistake. $10 million wasted there because he's super fragile. But, you know, the Dolphins organization this season, they were okay with going in with a super young fucking team, super inexperienced, with wide receivers that we knew were going to get injured, with an offensive line that we knew wasn't going to be good. They were okay with all those things. Completely okay with all those things. Okay? But then what did they do this offseason? Okay, so they weren't big spenders in free agency, but a lot of us at this point wish they would have been. We just wish they would have done things differently. Instead of getting Will Fuller, maybe go get Corey Linsley or one of these, you know, top offensive linemen that were out there in free agency. I'd rather you spend big money on that and help shore that shit up, and also bring in that veteran leadership, etc., etc., and I think that would have made your team so much better. But then what did they do, right? In the draft, look, again, I like Jalen Waddle as a player, and I think he has a lot of potential. Now, this coaching staff and organization is misusing the shit out of him. They don't know how to use him properly, okay? But to me, he wasn't the pick. Penei Sewell was the pick for me, 100%. First of all, you know, I'm not, you know, when they traded back to 12, I was super cool with that because they just picked up a bunch of draft capital. I wasn't psyched about moving back up to 6, but then, you know, especially because then it means that the player you pick is now going to cost 2 first-rounders. And, of course, as we know, the Dolphins are idiots for giving away their first-rounder and thinking that they were going to be better this year than they are for next year's draft to the Eagles, right? But now that player costs 2 first-round picks. And Waddle, he's not a bust by any stretch of the imagination, but with the way that this coaching staff or whatever is utilizing him, misusing him, etc., you know, they're wasting him. They're completely wasting him. Jalen Phillips, the second first-round pick, you know, so I would have taken Penei Sewell instead of Jalen Waddle, in my opinion. You know, that's just me. I didn't like the fact that they were just, you know, double, triple, quadrupling down at the wide receiver position, especially because, like, you know, almost all of them were injury-prone guys and, you know, couldn't expect to stay healthy, etc. But I wanted them to spread that love, and they basically ignored the offensive line. They ignored the running back position. They ignored linebacker. I thought they were going to, you know, I thought bringing in McKinney actually was going to turn out to be good based off of his run-stopping ability in preseason. They make the stupid decision to get rid of him, right? But anyway, back to the draft. So I would have taken Sewell over Waddle. Nothing against Waddle. He has had more than his fair share of drops, which is concerning a little bit. But that's definitely something he can turn around and fix. But the misuse of him is certainly the bigger point there. But, you know, that pick is just looking meh, especially when we really could use a stud on that offensive line. Jalen Phillips, he has gotten better each and every week. And I think that he has the potential to be a stud at some point. My big concern with him is his injury history, concussions, and I get that it wasn't, he wasn't playing football when he got the concussion. It was from a car crash, right? I get that. But concussions are not something that go away. The damage done is not something that goes away. It compounds each and every time you get one. And football is a very violent sport, especially a defensive end edge rusher, which he is, and that's his specialty. It's one of the most violent positions in the game. Okay, so the head injury, and so far he has had a couple, injuries. Like he had a couple minor things in training camp, but it wasn't the head. He hasn't had any concussion issues yet, which is good, and he has been improving because he is a super talented player each and every week, and he is a bright spot. But even still, they've been misusing him a bit. They're not letting him just pin his ears back like they should in a lot of cases, having him drop back, all of that kind of stuff. But for me, though, and again, it's nothing on the player's potential, but I actually liked Greg Rousseau in that pick if I was going to go defensive lineman, which I would have. And look how Greg Rousseau's doing. That's not to say that he'd have the same success here with this coaching staff, but that's the pick that I would have gone with personally. Now, and of course, all these guys are just fucking rookies. But Javon Holland, we get to the second round, and I actually really like him. He has grown on me a lot, and I think that he's got a lot of potential. But again, he's a rookie. They're not exactly putting him in position to succeed, et cetera, et cetera. So they're kind of wasting him, stunting his development, et cetera, et cetera. But I do like him. My pick, actually, if I was going to go with a safety, I actually preferably would have either gone running back or maybe even another offensive lineman at that position if it was me. But if I was going safety at the time, I said Trevon Moehrig was my pick. Although at the time, I also didn't know he had the injury issues that he had. I found out about that later. But to be fair, Javon Holland has grown on me. So I actually do like the potential of those first three picks. I just don't trust this coaching staff and this regime to get the most out of them, which is super unfortunate. Liam Eichenberg, I didn't like that pick. He's been okay, and I think maybe he could develop into a solid player, but I don't see his ceiling being all that high. I don't really see him being a Pro Bowler. I think he could be a serviceable player on the line, but I definitely would not have traded up, 9 spots to go get him. I would have stayed at 50, and I would have took Creed Humphreys or maybe Quinn Miners. That's what I would have done. Instead, they decide to give up a pick the following year to go up and get Eichenberg. Okay, Hunter Long, he's been inactive pretty much the whole time. I thought it was silly because they didn't need more tight ends. They could have gotten Quinn Miners there. They could have gotten a running back there. They could have done so much better. They could have prioritized so much better. And what has he done so far? Right? Yes, he's a rookie, but you drafted him in the third round, and he's been fucking inactive basically this entire time, except for when, you start to get fucking so many injuries that you can't afford to have him inactive, right? And then, Larnell Coleman, he's on IR, but he ended, the word is that if he didn't get placed on IR, he probably would have been cut, maybe possibly made it back to the practice squad, but also maybe possibly not, which would have made the third straight year in which they would have decided to cut one of their rookie draft picks, which would be absolutely outrageous. And then Garrett Dokes, yeah, he's on the practice squad, but there ain't really nothing there. So again, draft classes, this actually has the potential possibly to be one of their better ones, but their drafting and development has been absolute fucking garbage. Absolute fucking garbage the entire time. Right? So, and again, all of the number of things that I've been talking about as issues here, right? The core philosophies of Brian Flores and this team, how egotistical he is and how much he needs control. I've been saying that. The shady ways in which he operates, acting like a child, playing music, to the team to fucking call players out and shit. Super childish ways, right? All of those different things. The way he's treated all these players. the constant churning on the roster and the coaching staff, the fact that he's got all these yes men. I'm glad people are waking up and seeing it now, but I've been telling you guys this from Jump Street in 2019 because he showed who he was in 2019. People just didn't want to believe it. They just wanted to believe that he was going to be the next coming of Don Shula, and I've been telling you guys that that is not the case, that Brian Flores is a fraud, he's a douchebag, he's a scumbag. I don't like him, okay? But anyway, so now that we've got past that, and the things that they did this offseason, they jettisoned all those big contracts and the leaders from the team before, etc., which is obviously proving to be a very costly mistake. But and part of this context is yeah, I absolutely do think that he has lost this locker room. I don't think these guys are playing for him. I don't think they ever were in 2019 because they saw he was intentionally trying to lose. But each and every year he's done stupid and shady shit with his players, and he's treated them like shit, and they apparently can't talk to him, and he's fucking tough to play for and to deal with. So I've been telling you, bro, there's a toxic culture that was being built here. Nobody wanted to believe it. They just wanted to call me a hater, etc., etc. I've been telling people this, and it is all coming to fruition now. And I also told people back in 2019 that if this tanking thing doesn't go properly in 3 years, and if things don't, meet Stephen Ross's expectations, bro, I'm telling you, there is going to be a massive change coming. And ironically, a lot of the people now, I'm sure, that were calling me haters are now calling for these guys' heads. These people that were like, no, Chris Greer's amazing, and Brian Flores is going to be the next Don Shula in 2019 and 2020 when they wanted him to be head coach of the year. And I was saying he's a fraud and he's not what everybody thinks he is. Now everybody's like, oh, this dude needs to go. Or at least now most people, a lot of people. Anyway, so coming into this season, I thought that the product they put on the field last year was about maybe a 6 or 7 win team. So coming into the season, that's actually where I started with my season predictions. Okay, I actually had them going 6-11 to begin the year. Okay, now let's keep it clear though, with the way this year is turning out, they actually could even potentially be worse than that. There is a high probability at this point that they could fucking, that they might only win 3 or 4 or 5 games. And so they might even miss that mark. They might underachieve even per my, my predictions prior to the preseason. That was prior to the preseason. Okay? I had them going 6-11, and people were like, oh, you're a hater. There's no way. We're going to the playoffs. Look at what we did last year. We won 10 games. We doubled our win total. Blah, blah, blah. Brian Flores should be coach of the year. Blah. No, we fielded a 6-win team last year, so that's my basis. We just overachieved for the aforementioned reasons. So that's where I started from. Okay? And originally, let me tell you what my win-loss predictions were for the entire season then, prior to the preseason. I said that we were going to lose in week 1 to New England, lose to Buffalo in week 2, lose to Vegas in week 3, but then I said we were going to win in Indianapolis in week 4, lose to Tampa, and lose to Jacksonville. That was my first 6 games prior to the preseason. Now it changed after, the preseason happened in training camp because, I thought maybe our run defense and our pass rush was going to improve. They brought Javon Holland back and settled that whole situation and made sure to keep their top corner. The offensive line looked like they might be serviceable a little bit. The offense looked like it was going to have some big play potential. Tua was healthy and he was looking really good. Right? So over the course of the preseason, they did actually earn 3 wins from me, getting my win total up to 9. But I told people, look, that's as far as I can go until the regular season starts because they have to earn it from me. I'm not sold yet. Right? But anyway, so that was my win-loss predictions for the first 6 games. I had them going 1-5 in the first 6 games. Where I was wrong is we obviously won against New England, where I said we were going to lose, although, as we know, that was barely, right? We squeaked out that win, and, there is an argument to be made that we actually should have lost that game, and if it wasn't for Javon Holland's forced fumble that prevented them from at least kicking a field goal, if not putting up a touchdown, we would have lost that game. Okay, so I was wrong there, and then I was wrong about Indianapolis. I thought we were going to win that game. We obviously lost it. But so far, I'm actually dead right as far as my win-loss prediction for the first 6 games. We lost one. We're currently 1-5. Now, a couple of the games that I had actually changed, right? Because I said over the preseason they earned 3 games from me. Those games were the Las Vegas Raiders in week 3, the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 6, and the New York Jets game in week 11 when we go to New York. Now, when I had us as a 6-win team, I said, because I also thought that the Jets were going to be sneaky good, sneaky meaning they might win somewhere between 5 to 7 games at their absolute best. 7's probably at their absolute best, but I could see them maybe squeaking out like 5 games. And one of those games I had being against us when we go to their stadium and have to play them. Now, they actually have a top 15 defense right now, so that could still prove to be a tough game, especially with the way that this team is going. But anyway, so those were the games that I switched to jump me to 9 and 8. And I said, though, listen, they can earn a couple wins from me at the beginning of the season. If they beat New England, that'll bring my win total to 10-7. And if they beat the Buffalo Bills, 11-6. And you got to do that if you want to be a contender for the division, for the playoffs, to prove that you're actually taking a step forward from the 10-6 team that you were last season. And, you know, they barely got the win. You know, I still thought it was messy, and, you know, we probably should have lost that game, but the reality was we did get the W, so I gave it to them. So after week 1, I upped my season prediction to 10-7. But then I couldn't give them an 11th win because then they lost to the Bills. They went back down to 9-8 after losing to the Vegas Raiders, because that was one of the games that I switched. Then they dropped to 8-9 after losing to Indianapolis, because that was a game I had them winning the entire time. So obviously I had to change it because they lost. Then they lost to Tampa, and then they lost to Jacksonville today. That, again, the Jacksonville game was one that I'd switched from a loss originally to a win. So that 8-9, and then so now my season record, my current and updated season record is 7-10. 7-10. Although if I'm keeping it real, it probably is going to be, you know, maybe only 4, 5, or 6 wins, because I don't think we're going to beat Buffalo or Baltimore. Carolina's probably going to beat us. New Orleans and Tennessee, I think, are going to beat us. We could lose to the Patriots in the end of the season. And then between the 2 Jets games, Houston, Falcons, and Giants, we could lose a couple of those games. So it's looking right now as if my preseason record prediction of 6-11 is going to be likely accurate, if not worse. But, you know, I mean, we obviously still have to wait and see. But anyway, let me go through, though, because originally, well, the entire time before because I updated, I had my record prediction of 6-11 before training camp and the preseason. And then after all that, before the season actually started, I upgraded them to 9-8. Okay, but the entire time I had us losing against the Falcons because of the fact that I didn't like how they took away our bye week. I thought that's exceptionally stupid. You should give your guys that week to rest after coming back from London. I think that is going to be foolish. And I still think that the Falcons are probably going to win, especially with the way that they fucking have played through the first 6 weeks and just losing to the Jags. So, yeah, I'm going to probably stick with that as a loss in my record prediction. Anyway, but then Buffalo, we're not winning against Buffalo. That Houston game, and I've had that a loss as, the entire time. Houston game, I've had that as a win the entire time. Preseason, regular season, prediction, whatever. I've had that as a win, but at this point, there's no guarantee in that either. Baltimore, I've had that as a loss the entire time. The week 11 matchup against the Jets, I had that as a loss originally because I thought, division opponent, I think they're going to be sneaky good. We have to go play in their stadium. I think that they'll probably squeak out the win and, we'll end up splitting with the Jets. I changed that after the preseason because that was an obvious game for me to change to a win if I was going to upgrade them on the season. But that's not looking like a guarantee now at this point either. Okay, Carolina, I've had that as a win the entire time, but I'm not so sure now. The Giants, I've had that as a win the entire time, although with the way that we played, again, there are no gimme games. Obviously, week 14, we have our bye, late as fuck. I think it's going to be basically useless at that point because we're not going to be in the playoff hunt, so we're not going to be getting healthy to make a push. But then New York Jets in week 15, when they come down to here, I've had that as a win the entire time. But not a gimme. New Orleans, I've had that as a loss the entire time. Probably still will be. I've had the Tennessee Titans as a loss the entire time. Probably still will be. I've had the New England game at the end of the season as a win the entire time. But again, not a gimme, bro. And so, this season, so far, when it comes to my overall record prediction for the first 6 games, I've been pinpoint. I originally said, I've been pinpoint with my preseason prediction when I said they were going to go 6-11. I said that they were going to start 1-5 in the first 6 games, and they absolutely did. Again, where I was wrong is you just have to flip the New England and Indianapolis games. But anyway, so that gets us caught up now to where we are. And so in 2021, we are seeing all of these deep-seated and deep-rooted issues, player development, coaching, carousel in the coaching staff and on the team, etc., bad drafting, all of that stuff. Flo's ego, his fucking man-childness, right? All of these things. And that doesn't even go into the fact that he was spearheading the fucking Deshaun Watson stuff and he doesn't like Tua and, Tua's dad, Galu Tungavailoa hates Brian Flores because he realized early on he's a dickbag. Now you see the Nick Hicks stuff that's been coming out with performing them, right? The things they've been saying. I've been telling you guys this shit from Jump Street because he showed us who he is at that time. Nobody wanted to believe me. They wanted to call me a hater, etc. But it's all coming to fruition, and I've been fucking telling you guys about this. And so here we are. And now look, at this point, yeah, I think the season's lost. And what I mean by that in particular is that there's not a chance in hell that we make the fucking playoffs. Not a chance in fucking hell we make the playoffs. And that was the baseline expectation for the season. The baseline expectation for this season, in particular when it comes to Stephen Ross, I've been telling you guys, is at least a 10-win season that has you somewhat competitive within your own division, right? Because the Bills are in your division and they're one of the powerhouse teams. Can you keep up with them? And then also making it to the playoffs. That is not going to happen. And I hold true that at the end of the season, I find it likely, highly probable that Chris Grier and Brian Flores get fired. Even if they end up doing what Stephen Ross tells them to do, which could potentially save their jobs, of bringing in Deshaun Watson, because I still think it's going to end up being a complete train wreck and then he'll end up firing. However, if he did keep them around another year, that would be, Stephen Ross, doing what people say he fucks up at. One of the things that he fucks up at is his keeping guys too long. Anyway, so this season, man, this season is done, bro. And the fan base is completely fucking bailing, right? Fans are jumping off the ship left and right. Like I said, people were calling me haters for exposing Flores early on, and now they want the dude's head. I've been, called a hater for exposing Grier and his moves early on, saying that he's not really winning all of these trades, bro. He's getting shellacked. Teams are taking advantage of him, not the other way around. People want to call me a hater. Now they want his fucking head because they're realizing that, I was right the entire time. And so look, man, where do I think, and to wrap this up, because it has been, almost an hour and 10-minute rant here, but where do we go now at this point? And the honest answer, if I'm keeping it real, is it looks like my preseason prediction of 6-11 is going to be a lot closer to reality than even the 9-8 prediction that I had right before the season started. The generosity I gave them of a 3 game upgrade. But there is a potential that it could even be worse than the 6 games that I predicted, prior to training camp in the preseason. That's a very real possibility. Unfortunately, I'm right about this stuff, though. I don't like being right about this. I've been sounding the bells because I could see it all coming, and I want people to objectively be able to evaluate this team and understand where we really are and not buy into bullshit hype that doesn't exist. That's not real. That's fugazi and fake as fuck, right? Flores is a fraud, bro. That defense was not really elite last year, right? Anyway, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, where do we go from here? This season's lost. The record's not going to be good. We're not going to make it to the playoffs. But here's the thing. Now, it's not set in stone yet, but with the way things are going, I don't believe when I weigh the probabilities of various scenarios that could potentially come to pass, I think what has the highest probability is Stephen Ross is not going to fire Chris Grier or Brian Flores in the middle of the season. There might potentially be a firing somewhere in the offensive coaching staff or somewhere on the coaching staff, an assistant or maybe, one of these 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 coordinators we have. Maybe there'll be some kind of change up there, although I doubt it, even though because Brian Flores has said that, week in and week out that they're not really going to make any wholesale changes, etc. So that's probably not even likely, but I don't think he's gonna. I think he's going to let them play out the rest of the season. In part too, because if you do fire Brian Flores, well, first of all, if you fire one, you got to fire both because they are definitely joined at the hip at every stage of this. But also, if you fire Brian Flores, who are you going to bring in as interim head coach? There really aren't even any good options. So, and it doesn't really, it's not likely to do you very much good in the middle of the season either. So I don't think he fires them in the middle of the season. I think it's going to happen in the off season after the rest of the season continues down the disastrous path that we go. But, and we've even heard reports about how Stephen Ross, not only has he on a number of occasions signed off on the trade for Deshaun Watson and the asking price, even recently he has, but there were reports that Stephen Ross has even said to Grier that, hey, you need to go execute this trade for Deshaun Watson, and that could be the only way that you possibly save your job. The reason why it would save his job is because Stephen Ross thinks in his desperation that Deshaun Watson will be able to come in here and turn the season around. Okay? Now, the trade deadline is still only a couple weeks away, so we'll see, but if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen soon. And with the way that this team is going, even though Tua looked really good for the most part in this game against the Jags, I think that there is an extremely high probability that Stephen Ross dips into that fucking desperation well yet again because he's freaking out about how this season is going and he wants a winner now, bro. Right? He had the comments after firing Adam Gase, I hope it doesn't take 1, 2, or 3 years, but I want to build a sustaining winner. And then opening up the training facility, he, joked about wanting a Super Bowl, right? He's not going to fucking, he doesn't want to just completely waste this third year because he has an MO of every 3 years cycling a head coach. So he wants to try and get the most out of it. So I believe that there is an extremely high probability that sometime between now and the trade deadline, he tells them, you know what, either he gets confidence enough confidence by talking to Roger Goodell and whoever he needs to talk to, whatever, that Deshaun Watson's gonna be able to play, and he feels all right with it. He's already signed off on the compensation. Okay, Stephen Ross has said, I don't care what it costs, go get him. So he signed off on that. Maybe he feels confident that he's gonna be able to play and not get indicted or put on the exempt list, or maybe he's just so desperate at this point, and I think this is a real possibility, that he just says, fuck it, I don't care. So, but we'll see. There is, I think it's November 2nd, if I'm not mistaken, is the trade deadline. So we'll see. It's not 100% guarantee. I'm not saying, nor have I ever said that it's a 100% guarantee, although I think that the probability is 90% plus, and that makes it a damn close to a sure thing. It makes it 90% plus that it's going to happen, which is a very high probability. Okay. And so I think that's ultimately what's going to end up happening. That's where I'm leaning, because to me, that's what has the biggest and highest probability of being the move that gets made. And they're going to think that that's going to save the season, and it's not, because Deshaun Watson does not solve all these issues. And so, right now, that is my biggest fear. My biggest fear. Because if they do that, that means they've already basically whiffed on damn near fucking their entire 2019, 2020, and 2021 drafts, especially if you trade for Deshaun Watson, because that means Tua's not going to be in Miami for much longer. I promise you that. If they bring in Watson, Tua's going to be going. So whether it's trade or whatever, I mean, it would likely be a trade, right? But he's going to go someplace else. He is not going to stay here and be Deshaun Watson's backup. That is not going to happen. So you basically shit away the previous 3 years of drafts. Now you're going to give away all of your top draft capital for the next 2 years, take on his massive cap hit, deal with the potential legal issues and all of that stuff, just to have, the season go into the fucking shitter anyway, fail completely, and then end up firing Brian Flores and Chris Greer at the end of the season because we only end up having 2 or 3 wins or some shit like that, and it ended up being even worse than I thought originally because this team has so many issues and so many problems. And then you're hitting the reset button again. You're giving up on Tua, and your tanking strategy failed. It was a complete fucking waste of time. So that is my biggest fear, and that is unfortunately where I lean as far as what I expect to happen based off of all of the data and information that I have available to me. And I hope I'm wrong about that. But unfortunately, as I've chronicled over the past few years in a number of ways, they have proven me very, very right on so many different levels. So hopefully this is the one way, because look, at the end of the day, that would be the ultimate desperation move. And if Stephen Ross makes that move, and it 100% proves everything that I've been saying about him, that he doesn't know how to make proper football decisions, that he thinks the only thing that you need to do is just fucking throw resources at the problem, whether it's draft capital or cap space, and that's going to solve it. You have to go after big name free agents. You have to make these big splashy moves and trades. Right? All of that stuff. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Oh, and that, again, one of the core issues with his blueprint for running this organization is he's so dead set on finding his Dan Marino and his Don Shula, as opposed to making sure that he has a team that is properly built, in its entirety, as opposed to just focusing so much on the one position, the quarterback, and making sure that you have a good overall coaching staff instead of just trying to, find the one dude at the helm that you think is going to be the thing. No, bro, you need an entire coaching staff, a good coaching staff that has chemistry and cohesion that doesn't change every year. You need a team that's not consistently super young and inexperienced with constant changeover every year, and with, bad drafted players and a coaching staff that can't develop, right? So anyway, that is what I have to say. I understand that was a very long rant, about an hour and 20 minutes. You know, but that is, you know, that is my feel, and that is my take, and that is my evaluation on the status of the Dolphins, everything the past few years. And yeah, you know what? I'm going to own it when I'm proven right. Now, again, we still have to wait and see how some of this season turns out. And there are some things that, you know, I have predicted, right, or basically said that I think is going to happen because it has the highest probability. That's my prediction, because to me it has the highest probability. Some of those things haven't been set in stone yet, like trading for Deshaun Watson, but they've proven me right on so many levels in so many instances that, you know, it's worrisome to me. So that's how I feel about it. And I don't think that, look, and again, I'm just going to end on this. As much as I give Stephen Ross credit for the things that he does within the community, you know, the money he donates and so on and so forth, with as much credit as he gets for building the stadium and the training facility, this dude does not know how to make proper football decisions. Whether it be signing off on the big name free agents, feeling like it's the splashy moves that are going to get it done, just throwing resources at the wall, whether it be, you know, the coaching and GM hires that he's done, right? Like, he's failed fucking miserably. And it's, to me, it's absolutely clear that he's currently desperate and has been in full desperation mode since 2019 when he decided to implement the tank. But if he trades for Deshaun Watson, there's no longer any question that he's just gonna, you know, that he's just gonna keep going and get more and more desperate and keep making, you know, bigger and more ridiculous moves, and it's not gonna work out. And so, look, yeah, I do not believe that Stephen Ross is gonna ever lead us to a Super Bowl and to a consistent winner. I don't think he's ever going to hire the right guys. I don't think he has the right blueprint. He's focusing way too much on the wrong things. He has bad philosophies, right? It's not real estate, bro. This is not real estate. Like, I get you're good at that. You're not good at this. Okay? So it mind boggles me that people want to constantly blame coaches and GMs, but they never want to get to the root, right? The fish rots from the head down. Stephen Ross is the motherfucking head. You can't start at the neck. You have to start at the fucking head. Otherwise, you're never going to see what the actual root of the problem is. So, anyway, that's what I got. I hope you guys appreciate my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. Of course, as always, follow me on Twitter at DillonTartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.